Hello and welcome to Host Planet Bitesize, the podcast brought to you by Host Planet and Host Philly. My name is James Farley, the founder of Host Planet, and our goal is to share everything you need to know about buying and managing short-term rentals. Today's guest is Peter Markos, and he's got 5 tips to share about designing the perfect short-term rental. Okay, real talk now for all you hosts out there. You know that moment when your guest messages you again with, "Hey, what's the Wi-Fi code?" Or you're staring at 5 different calendars, wondering if you've accidentally double booked the cottage. Yes, we've all been there. That's why here at Host Planet, we recommend Host Philly. It's basically your rentals control center. It handles bookings across all the big platforms, syncs your calendars to ensure there are no double bookings, automates guest messages, and even creates these really slick digital guidebooks that stop all the repeat questions. Honestly, it just makes your life easier and keeps your guests happier, helping you achieve those all-important 5-star reviews. And here is a little bonus. If you're a Host Planet listener, you can get $500 off onboarding for Host Philly's property management software and 30% off digital guidebooks for life. Just hit the link in the show notes and use the codes PLANET500 for the PMS and Host Planet GB for the guidebooks. And if you'd like a proper walkthrough, there's also a link to book a demo with Frank Bosey from Host Philly. He will show you how it all works. Less stress, more bookings, sorted with Host Philly. Peter, thank you for joining us on Host Planet Bitesize. You've got 5 design tips for short-term rentals, so take it away with tip number 1.
Yeah, thanks for having me, James. What I've done is I've just got 5 tips, but I'm going to try and integrate these into both projects which have been completed, but whether somebody's thinking about starting from scratch as well. So my first tip would be to start by integrating nature into the design. Now, there's a few benefits to this. I mean, the more technical term to this is biomimicry. The idea with biomimicry is it emulates, you're starting to allow the design to emulate parts of nature. And that's not just said, but it's been substantiated to have lots of health benefits in terms of productivity, well-being, happiness. So essentially the idea is you're bringing nature into the design. If you were starting from scratch, that would be the idea of starting to use natural materials like timber and materials which take a more natural form, a more organic form. And that in turn improves people's well-beings and happiness. Quite a stark example to this is something known as Maggie Centres, which are built across the UK. Maggie Centres are places where people who have terminal cancer, they sort of spend their time in these Maggie Centres, and it actually improves their well-being, their happiness, and what is obviously a very, very difficult time. These are typically designed by what are known as star architects or star architects. And like I said, that's actually been substantiated to have real-world evidence, particularly by Harvard University, which have prepared various white papers beside it. So I think that can certainly be brought into people's short-term letting businesses. So like I said, if you've already got an existing business, a lot of that might be how do you bring natural plants into the space, potentially look at ways of opening up the space, or even things like bifold doors. How do you start to use natural materials? There's a lady I know, she's designed a really unique canal boat, but one of the things which really just differentiates it is this idea that I think it's got something like 300 plants in it. So she made an agreement with a plant supplier, and they offered to give her 300 plants, and it's really one of the real differentiating factors. And I think, as we all know, is the more differentiating factors you have to holiday let, the more occupancy it gets, and the more rental income it makes. So it's a real game changer. I think the second point I'd say is this one is probably more useful for people who are looking to start out or looking to sort of grow their business. and grow the amount of units they have or the amount of holiday lets they've got. And that is that bigger is not necessarily better. And I actually made this mistake myself. So just for context, I'm an architect, but I've also got a service accommodation business, particularly around a very unique cabin that we sort of designed. But the issue is, the issue I made and the mistake I made, and the thing that I've quite learned the hard way is we sort of assumed at the start that making it bigger would mean people prefer more space, and as a result, it would result in a higher rental income and a higher yield. But that's not really translated, and actually what has ended up happening is we're paying a lot more for upfront construction costs and a lot more for ongoing maintenance, heating costs, etc., etc. Now, I also think that this is an issue which is quite prevalent in the construction industry, because I see a lot of homes, and this is something I work with my clients in the architecture business, is I see a lot of homes which are designed, they're far bigger than they need to be, and they end up obviously going over budget and costing the client a lot of money unnecessarily. So I think working with an architect or a designer to really maximize the space and be space efficient, because ultimately you're paying per square meter. So that's the second one. And then I think the third thing I'd say as well is just the importance of having a design which responds to the location. Now, I think that's obviously a little bit subjective, and it's up to everyone to decide how they go about to do that, potentially work with an architect or work with a designer to do that. But every site has its own uniqueness, whether it's particular views or a particular constraint necessary in the shape of the site. And we always say when we're designing projects that the constraints are typically the opportunities as well. So something that somebody might see as a limiting factor could actually become a real possibility and a real opportunity. So you'd really want to work to make the design more location responsive. And I think one of the reasons is if you go on Airbnb or any booking site or Google, there's so many shepherd's huts and products which are just quite difficult to differentiate. And usually the differentiating factor is the location. Now that's great, but I think also just thinking, okay, the location's a differentiating factor. How do we bring the design to also be a differentiating factor so that that's something which maximizes views or frames certain spaces? So that's definitely a third recommendation, which again, I think that one's a little bit more difficult to respond to when you've already built something. I think in that sense, it could be certain ornaments you bring into the space. Potentially, if you're doing an internal fit out, you might think to use natural materials or materials which are sourced from a particular a site or a particular place. And then I think the fourth one I would really suggest is building a brand around the structure. So this is something, again, because I've obviously got that service accommodation, so that's something we've done with our own cabin project, is to start to build the brand around the design of the actual product. So for context, just to give you an example, my product, it's called the Monocoque cabin, but it takes construction lessons from automotive and aerospace. So typically with a building, it's got internal columns and walls, but the way this works is it's got a really organic shape. I'll just show you a prototype because we 3D printed an example, but it's got this organic shape is actually what acts as the structure, and that acts as the structural shell. And then this has since actually just been published on lots of design magazines like Design, Design Boom, parametric architecture, and has actually got a lot of international exposure off that. But I think what's quite important is what's been quite a good differentiating factor is we're actually using the structure to build the brand. I think something which naturally can do this quite well is country homes, because they're just differentiated by the uniqueness of the existing structure. But I think maybe for people on maybe a bit more of a tighter budget, or working with more, let's say, conventional materials, then it's just thinking about how to be a bit smarter around building the brand around the structure. And then my final tip, and I think this is actually ignored a lot in the construction industry, in the service accommodation industry, particularly around the cabins, less so in Europe. I feel a lot of European businesses have got a grasp on this, is that you've really got to design for the long term. I see a lot of products on Airbnb which have a lifespan of about 3 to 5 years, maybe a bit longer as well in certain instances. But if you design, even as a cabin, if you design a really nice cabin, it's using not necessarily the most expensive materials, but it's using good quality materials, it can last for a good 100 years. Sure, within that time, the cladding might need changing and there will be room for repair, but that adds a lot of value to the business, and it reduces the sort of maintenance costs and the need you've got to replace the structure. And if you ever want to come and sell the business, it's going to have a really good sale value. I'd actually probably say out of the 5 tips, that would probably be my favourite, because I think it's such a prevalent issue. It's a bit like a Barber jacket or a Brompton bicycle or something. These are things which, yes, there's a little bit more of an upfront cost, but they last you a lifetime if you look after them. So yeah, they're definitely my 5 tips.
Fantastic, Peter. Yeah, 5 brilliant tips there. A few things really stood out. The 300 plants. I'd certainly need an antihistamine if I was visiting that rental. What I really liked was number 2, actually. Bigger is not necessarily better. I think we see this quite a lot in short-term rentals, where people have maybe a 3-bedroom property and the 3rd bedroom is really small, but they try and cram maybe like a bunk bed in there so they've got the extra beds, but it doesn't necessarily deliver a great guest experience. So I think utilizing your space effectively is great, but don't go overboard at the expense of that great guest experience and, of course, the aesthetic.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's really good. Yeah, especially if you think about it differently, is instead of saying, oh, let's have a maximum amount of bedrooms in the unit, saying, oh, let's have like a workspace or something, or an alternative space or some kind of like family room, then that actually gives prospectives who are looking for a place to stay an opportunity to be like, oh, that could be a place I can sort of go and get away from the office and, work away. So yeah, absolutely.
So brilliant then. So integrate nature was number 1, bigger not necessarily better number 2, location responsive design, building the brand around the structure, and then of course the 5th and final tip, designing for the long term. If you were starting from scratch, where would you want to develop something, and what would your ideal rental be like, if you could kind of describe that to us?
So my ideal rental is the product to some extent. It's the product we've developed basically. So there's kind of 2 sides to my business, or effectively 3. Is I help clients with their projects as an architect, particularly around the luxury holiday home sector. So that's our specialty. But alongside that, I have my own product which we've developed, which is this monocoque cabin, and it supports 2 people, and we're looking to sort of grow that as a business, look at maybe a 4-person model as well. What I've really liked with that model and that business is usually the guests we get are really fantastic. The sort of people who want to go away for a little retreat. The yield is pretty good. My parents have a rental business themselves, a service accommodation business themselves. My product is about a third of the cost of theirs, and per night it rents for about 3 times as much as their products do. So it's a very, very good ROI. But I think those combinations of I really like the types of guests we have. We typically, 90% of 99% of the feedback we get is extremely positive. People who are looking to get away for their anniversary and things. And that's just been extremely positive, because obviously there's a side of making money, but there's actually that idea that you're offering to people like a part of their lifestyle as well. I'm not actually sure if I really answered your question there, but I just kind of went off on a tangent there. Did that sort of answer the question?
I think so, yeah, just about. So tell us more about Markos Design Workshop then, and where people can find out more information.
Yeah, so if people want to, they can obviously go on our website. It's Markos, which is Markos, Design Workshop. And like I said, our business is situated around maximising rental income and yield for clients around good design. So the idea is, the more unique the design is, the more contextual, the more situated and suited to a particular scale of the client and the design market, the more people are going to make. But on top of that, like I said, we do really focus on quality, and that's not necessarily tied to cost. But we really think there is a lack of focus on quality, particularly, I'd have to say, in the UK market. I think lots of the Europeans have got much more of a grasp on this, and they realise that it adds much more value if you ever want to sell a business, and particularly thinking not just 5 years, but 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah, invest from the start. It'll pay off in the long term. Peter, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for joining us on Host Planet Bitesize.
No, thank you, James. And I'm, like I said to you in the past, I'm a real fan of this show. I love listening to it. It's given me great tips for my own business as well. So thanks so much for having me.
Great to chat to Peter Markos there and hear his design tips. Remember, bigger is not necessarily better. All right, that's it for today's episode. Remember, this podcast is brought to you in collaboration with Hostfully, which is trusted by short-term rental professionals across the globe. As a Host Planet listener, you get 2 exclusive offers: $500 off onboarding for Hostfully's property management software. Just use the code PLANET500, and 30% off digital guidebooks for life. Use the code HostPlanetGB. To grab these deals, click the link in the show notes or head to hostfully.com. For more free education, tips and trends from the STR industry, visit hostplanet.club, where you can sign up for our newsletter, listen to our podcasts, and download a suite of ebooks for hosts and property managers. That's it for today's episode. Until next time, happy hosting.